Hey, hello, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration to help us in the process of getting students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I work at IE Business School Publishing, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials.
Hey, Engagers, and today we have Gustavo Tondello. Gustavo, did I get the Tondello right? Is that the right pronunciation?
Yes, that's right. Perfect.
Are you prepared to engage?
Yes, I'm prepared. Let's do it.
Let's go. Let's do this. So Gustavo, he is the co-founder and gamification specialist of MotiviUX. So MotiviUX, the research leader at GamFed, the International Gamification Confederation, and a Ph.D. candidate and seasonal lecturer at the University of Waterloo, Canada. With more than 10 years of experience in software engineering and business analysis, he is currently researching how to design and personalize gameful systems and learning experiences. He has also published many scientific articles on gamification and writes a popular blog on techniques for making everyday interactions more motivating. It's called Gameful Bits. Gustavo uses the gameful design methods to create participatory learning techniques, which help students practice what they are learning to further develop their skills in engaging ways. That sounds very exciting and very related to what we talk about here in Professor Game. So welcome, Gustavo. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for attending to the Engagers call.
Thank you for inviting me.
So Gustavo, let's get right into the first subject, and that first subject is that we'd like to know, how does a day with Gustavo look like? A regular day, perhaps.
Yes, well, I have a bunch of different regular days depending on the schedule for the day. When I don't have any external meetings or anything like that, I usually work from my home office all day, and then this involves different types of activities. I might be, for example, doing some research on gamification, reading scientific papers, or writing a paper myself, or planning or executing a study that I'm gonna write up as a paper. Or maybe I am reading the news on gamification around the world, or writing some myself for my blog or for any other types of publications. Or maybe I'm also having meetings with my students or with clients or something like this. There are other days when I have to teach some lectures at the University of Waterloo, and of course I go out and I have lectures there. I'm also frequently at the Games Institute at the University of Waterloo, collaborating with other PhD students, postdocs, and professors in projects related to gamification research and practice.
So I'm guessing you teach gamification as well, right?
Sadly, no, because gamification is not a regular course at the university yet. I hope someday it will be, but no. So I teach regular computer science courses.
Okay.
Although what I try to do is I always try to see if I can add at least one topic about gamification in all the courses I teach. So I'm doing this term, for example, I'm teaching business systems analysis, just regular course. But then I have one lecture when I talk about gamification to students and why should they care about it and what can they do when analyzing a system, and add some sort of game thinking, game elements to whatever they are designing.
Fantastic. So that keeps it exciting as well in the world of gamification. And I think that we can very much relate. Many of the people who are listening are also lecturers, teachers, professors. So we can relate to many of the things that you're talking about. It's not always exactly what you want to teach, but it's always exciting to come up with new things. Your research as well is related to gamification. So that looks like a very, very exciting time to live in. And
the students always give me good feedback that they enjoy the inclusion of that topic in the course, so I keep doing it. Yeah.
So maybe in the future you might consider speaking to the department, or I don't know how it works in your university, and offering an elective on gamification. That could be something that could work in the future.
Yep, maybe.
Let's cross fingers over here.
Yes.
So Gustavo, we would like to go now into what we like to call the story of your favorite fail or first attempt in learning. Especially when it's around creating games, gamification, gameful experiences. And we call it the favorite failure because it probably led you to a massive learning or something very interesting you learned from that failure or even for future success.
Yeah, so my story, well, I'm going to tell a story related to something I tried to do to gamify a course on programming user interfaces.
Okay.
It's a computer science course. And what I tried to do that time was I tried to gamify the students' experience with the assignments. And at the same time, I tried to do a research project as I had planned to gather student feedback and write a paper about it. The biggest failure in that project was actually not in the gamification of the course itself. It was more on the research side of things, because in the end, I only invited students to voluntarily answer my feedback form about gamification of the course. There are several limitations that we have here in North America because of ethical considerations. We cannot offer too many incentives that would make students feel pressured to participate in our study. But I think maybe I took that too heavily and I was too light in the incentives that I offered. And what happened is that I only had, I think, 16 responses from students out of 160 students that I had.
Ouch.
10% response rate. And although I still took some interesting information from those 16 students who answered, that was not nearly enough for a good paper. I even tried to write the paper and submit to a few conferences, but all the reviews were unanimous, telling me in their reviews that, with just the 16 students, all the considerations that you made are not really valid enough. You would need more feedback. Right? So that was a learning experience for me that next time I do this, I need to think more carefully about how to incentivize the students to actually participate in the study. It's a very delicate matter because I need to take all the ethical considerations, but also need to incentivize the students a bit more.
So related precisely to that, what would you say is something that you learned, something that you would do different? I know you're saying that you would perhaps change the incentives, that maybe the way you incentivize your students to reply to that survey, but is there anything you say, well, had I done this, or I did this and it didn't work? Is there something that you would say, well, if I try it again, I'm sure I'm going to try to change this in particular? Is there some learning, something that we can take out from that experience?
Yes, I guess for many of the research projects that we do, usually a small extrinsic motivation incentive does a good job in getting more participants, because we always talk about how intrinsic motivation is important in gamification and everything, but it depends on the situation, right? And in this situation, the participants don't have any intrinsic motivation, so because it's my study, it's not theirs, right? So that's the case when an extrinsic incentive really works. So what I would do next time is try to see what kind of incentive I could offer that's still within the ethical boundaries, but something like offering additional credits for the students to take part of the survey, or maybe offering participants to enter a draw of gift card or something like this, like we do in other types of studies, just to get more participation.
That's an interesting insight. So in the future, consider that when you I mean, it all comes back to the motivation of the students. What was their motivation to participate in the study? And I'm guessing that the main thing that we could take away from your story, Gustavo, is to always not forget that they also have their own motivations, and that if you want them to do a certain action, if you want them to do something in particular that is not in any way perhaps related to what they're interested in, you have to take a look back and say, well, how would I get them interested in this survey? Because if they don't have anything at stake, if they're not interested in getting the survey done, and it's only you, well, maybe some students will be very generously participate, but there's going to be, as in Gustavo's experience, maybe a vast majority of people who say, I got too many things to do, I'm just not going to do the survey, I'm going to move on. So take that into consideration when you're designing, whether it's something for your research or even if it's something in favor of the students. They don't always realize automatically what it is that it's, so to speak, in it for them. And always consider that that's a possibility. So for me, that's a key takeaway I have from your story, Gustavo. And the next question that we always move into is a completely, complete spin, taking it and spinning 180 degrees. And we always like to ask you, what is like a big challenge or something very interesting that you faced and actually, solved that challenge or done something related to gameful design or gamification that you're maybe very proud of, something that you can talk to us about. What can you tell us that story, Gustavo?
Yes, sure. So I'll tell the experience that I'm having with actually the course that I'm teaching that we mentioned before, business systems analysis. So when I began teaching this course, my challenge was to find a way to engage students with actually improving their learning experience. Okay. Because I didn't want to create something where students just memorize the content and then they went to write an exam, got a grade, and that's it. I wanted to provide them with more opportunities to do practical exercises throughout the course, but exercises that they wouldn't feel that were only being used to assess their learning, but that they could see those exercises actually an opportunity for them to be learning more. Because particularly with this course, systems analysis, my experience is something that you get better as you practice more, right? You can understand the basics, but as you practice, you are faced with different situations, you learn from them, and then you are a better analyst. So I wanted to provide the students these opportunities to have this kind of experience within the course. So my inspiration came from the experiences that we have in games, because games are very good in helping us learn, right? And some of the best games are not those games that let us succeed the first time we try things. Very often, the good games are those that present us with challenges that are above our current skill set, so that we won't succeed the first time we try. And then we need to analyze what we missed and get better and improve our skill set so we can finally overcome that challenge. And so I applied this kind of thinking to my course and the exercises that I wanted students to do. And I created a mechanism that worked in a similar way. So I provided them with a set of exercises that, and to even make the appealing of the motivational appealing of game thinking stronger, I framed these assignments as quests that they have to do instead of assignments, but it's basically the same idea. And when they submit these quests, then I grade the quests, but I grade the quests not only to give them a numerical grade that they're going to use at the end of the term to calculate their final grade, but most importantly, I give them feedback on what they did right and wrong in the quest. If it's not good enough, I never say that they failed, but I say that I give the quest back to them with the feedback so they can improve their answer and submit it again. And so they do. They read my feedback, they try again, and they submit it again, and then I evaluate it again.
Sorry to interrupt you here, because I have like I completely agree with doing that kind of thing, and I've spoke about it before. But I can also see the other side of people who say, well, yes, that sounds very cool, and they might be learning more. But what happens when students are also a bit competitive and they're thinking about their grades? Like that student who just handed in the assignment straight on and got a pretty good grade. Doesn't he say, well, I want to be the best in the class, and instead of this other guy who got the other opportunity? And again, I completely relate that the importance is not in the grades. That's completely external. That's something that has many flaws and there's many problems, but that's the way education is working right now. So there's people who focus very, very much on the grades. Have you had any experience when there's a student who says, well, but you gave him another opportunity? I mean, is that unfair? Or have you had any kind of encounter in that sense, Gustavo, in your experience?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I didn't have any experience like this in this course. I feel that particularly in this course, students are a bit less competitive than in other courses I've taught. But I agree that might be a challenge. But maybe I was lucky, and in other times I taught this course, I didn't get any student as
it was well thought for your player types, so it worked.
exactly.
No, I completely agree. That's actually amazing. I mean,
and also something. Sorry, just quick. Something that I noticed as well is that although they had a minimum amount of quests that they needed to complete to get the maximum grade for that part of the course, there's always a few students that do all or almost all the quests just for the learning experience, even if after some point it won't make any influence in their grades anymore, right? So I feel that at least some of the students really enjoy that learning experience more than they worry about grades. So that's interesting.
That's fantastic, and that's what I wanted to say, because I've said this like a million times here and in talks, etc. It's that we humans tend to forget that learning is actually fun. And we forget. I mean, the whole way that we learn everything, and we come into the world and everything is new, and we're learning absolutely everything, is having fun. It's in it with a playful attitude, and we fail and we try again, and we learn how to stand up, and we learn how to walk, and we fall down, and then we try again. We try to run, then we make it and we can run, etc., etc., etc. So I wanted to bring it precisely back to that, because it's true that the many things in the system are guiding us to thinking grades. I want to have the best grades. I want to compete with my colleagues. I want to be the best in my... And that's not bad, as in the person who's thinking in that. That's fine. But we also have to think in ways, as Gustavo was describing it, people who are actually excited to do the assignment and to learn and to see new things, and because the system is exciting for them. And that way, and that's where I have to say I always try to maximize efforts, is not on how much the grade will be influenced or not. It's on how much they will learn. And I know that there's many passionate people here, professors, teachers, who are also passionate about learning. So always keep that in mind. Don't forget that there's all that fairness of the grades, etc. But the main thing and the reason that they're there for is to learn. So thank you for that, Gustavo. That's actually a beautiful story, and I love that method, and I love that you're applying it, and especially that you're applying it with a lot of success.
Thank you.
So, Gustavo, the next question is that we would like to know is if you have any sort of process when you're applying, gameful thinking, gamification, whether it's for a class, whether it's with clients, what is there a process there? Are there a series of steps that you always take when you're going to go into a project like this one? Can you describe us that process if you have it?
Yes, sure. It is, I would say, a bit different when I'm working on a course like those that I was just describing, because then our courses already have kind of a structured grades, assignments, so it's more trying to adapt those with game thinking. But the other kind of projects that I work on, which are more related to gamifying information systems or other types of software applications, then I follow my own process that I developed by studying all the other processes that are out there. And I begin by trying to best understand the goals. So I'm going to echo what other people already said here at Professor Game, that most important step to begin with is actually understanding the goals, both the goals of the business, so what that company needs, but also the goals of the users and the motivation of the users. What are they interested in, what they want. And then with that information, I usually like to do a sort of a motivational analysis. So I think about the different types of motivations that those users might have. And for that, I usually what I have been using the last projects is the gameful design heuristics that I developed as part of my research. It's available online if people want to take a look. It's basically a summary of the different categories of motivations that I found in the literature. And for each type of motivation, I use it kind of a lens to ask questions. So what kind of motivation would the user have for to help them feel competent, for example, to help them feel autonomous and things like that. And I try to understand how that would work in that system. And after that understanding, then I think about gameful design elements. So also, as part of my research, I have been studying a lot of how to classify game design elements and how each game design element can potentially contribute to different types of motivations. So at this point, I try to look at these classifications and try to see what different element I could use for each one of the different types of motivations, and that would be appropriate to the system and to the users that I'm dealing with.
Fantastic. That makes a lot of sense. That's a very structured process, as I see, and you have many elements. Gustavo, you mentioned that you have this process available somewhere for people to see. Can you mention or name drop what's that web page or that place where we can find it?
Sure. That process you can find at our website, gamefuldesign.hcigames.com.
Fantastic. So there you go. Engagers, that's somewhere where you can look at and you can see that process in detail. I'm sure it's very well explained. Gustavo does some fantastic things. So Gustavo, we're going to move into this next round of questions, and here, instead of focusing on the story that we were focusing on before or the explanation of your process, we're going to go more for so to speak rapid fire answers. So okay. The first question that we wanted to ask you is, what is something that you think basically any gamification project could benefit from? You could even call it a best practice in gamification.
Yeah, so related to what I was saying about the method that I use, I think that every project would benefit from having a proper user research and user experience process. So actually engaging with the target users, understanding who they are, what they do, what they want, and taking that into consideration in the project. I've seen a lot of people talk about designing personas in gamification projects, for example, but sometimes these personas are designed just from the designer's imagination. So that's not what I'm talking about, right? I'm talking about actually looking for users that represent your target population, actually talking to them, trying to understand their needs, their motivations, and then writing personas, if you want to call them the personas, but from real users, and then involving them in the experience when you're designing, when you are testing, also test with real users that could be part of your target population. Because in the end, we have a very good idea of what can potentially motivate people, but as we say, it's a gameful experience, and an experience only happens when the user is interacting with the system. So we can design the system very well, at least we think we design the system very well, but we need to test it. We need to actually give it to users to test it for us to see if that experience is going to happen as we imagined that.
As we planned it.
Exactly.
And Gustavo, I wanted to highlight two things. We will never get tired in this podcast of repeating the importance of understanding your users, the actual people that are going to use, that are going to participate in your gamified experience, whether that's digital or not digital. Because in the end, you're designing for them. Imagine just like I always put extreme examples in this, but the idea is precisely to get the power of how important this can be. Because if you're talking about something that is a contextual joke for people who lived around the decade of the 80s, and what you have in the room is people who were born in the 90s, then the chances are that the joke, they will never be able to understand it, and that you're losing that opportunity to connect with your audience. And that's a very clear example. If you don't know who you're going to talk to, you might make that kind of very obvious mistakes. And then looking back, you say, but that was so obvious. Of course it was obvious, but you weren't able to know it beforehand because you didn't have the proper research. So that's very, very important. And the other thing I wanted to highlight is that when you apply gamification to something, it's very different than creating a game, in the sense that when you create a game, you say, well, the type of people I want that will play this game are these types of people. So as Gustavo was mentioning, that can be in the designer's mind. You create that type of people, and if those people exist out there, they will come to your game. However, when designing gamification, and especially in the classroom, you cannot say, well, I want these kinds of students to do this, because what about the other students? Unless you do it for all the types of students you have, you can't leave other types of students outside. So remember that when creating gamification, you're creating for the people that are actually there. You're not just trying to attract people normally. You're specifically designing it for an audience that's already existing, or for a kind of people that's already there. So always remember that you have to take them in particular into account. So thank you. That's very, very useful, Gustavo.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's something that I always say as well. Like, unless you have a very small amount of users, probably you're going to have users from all different user types interacting with your system, right? And so you need to think about all of them. Exactly like you said, we cannot build a system that some users are going to like and some others are not going to find the system enjoyable at all, as we could do with a game. Because usually when you're doing something that's a game for application, you want every user, if they're not going to love your system, at least they're not going to dislike your system, right? Because the worst thing that you could do is build a system that's going to be actively demotivating someone. So you need to build something that, of course, you're never going to build something that's perfect for everybody. Some people always like more than others, but at least that everybody can find something that they like, so at least they don't dislike and they're not completely demotivated by your system.
Absolutely. So we were talking about games and game design, and in that same line, we would like to know, Gustavo, and this is a very important question for us, what is your favorite game?
Instead of one game, I'm going to give you multiple answers with 2 series of games. Is that okay?
Let's do it.
So my 2 favorite series of games that I've been playing for decades and I don't get bored with them are the Civilization series. I've played, I think, all versions since the first one. And also the Final Fantasy series of games. Also played, not all of them, but almost all the different versions of the game.
It's funny because lately I have to confess that the Civilization answer has been coming up more and more. I don't know if it's a trend. It's because I've been interviewing people who like specifically that game, but it's a trend. Final Fantasy is completely a new one, and I have to say I wasn't a big fan. But with the new versions of the Nintendo, these mini NES and the mini Super NES. They have the original versions, and I'm getting pretty stuck to those games as well. I'm enjoying them very much. So those are definitely great games.
Yes.
Gustavo, is there somebody that you would like to listen to interviewed in this podcast in Professor Game?
Yeah. So you've been interviewing already a lot of people that I would like to listen. So you've been doing a very good job there.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So I'm going to suggest someone that's not been interviewed yet, and someone close to me, if that's okay. So I'm going to suggest my PhD supervisor, Professor Leonard Naki.
Leonard Naki, oh yeah. That would be fantastic.
I think he has very interesting things to say to the audience, because he has been one of the pioneers of doing research in gamification and relating it with the research on games and player experience and what we can learn from games research using gamification. So I'm sure he would have interesting things to say.
I'm sure he would. And to be honest, he's one of the persons that I had thought of at some point, but he was not on my radar, on my list. So definitely, let's talk after the interview, and if you can help me get in contact with Leonard, that would be fantastic.
Sure.
So the next question, Gustavo, is if there is any book that you would recommend to this audience, to the engagers, what would you recommend as a book that they should read? It could be gamification related directly, or maybe even something else.
Yeah, so the same line, there are lots of interesting gamification books that I've seen that other people have already listed in past episodes. So I'm going to cite something different on the lines of games user research. And the name of the book is exactly that, Games User Research. It was published recently, and it's a collection of several different articles that explore this topic from different points of view. And although it's not directly about gamification, so in the sense that there's a lot that we can learn from what they have been investigating about the player experience, and that we must know if we are trying to design gameful experiences for gameful systems, right?
Makes a lot of sense. And many of the books that have been recommended as well and that I love are not gamification books. I mean, there's fantastic gamification books out there, but precisely the discipline of gamification has to learn from games, and it has many things to learn from games. So anything that is related as well to games, game experience, gameful design, etc., is also very, very closely related to gamification in one way or another. And to be honest, I know you'll probably have stronger views in that sense, but I try not to be racist with with the term of what is gamification, what is a game, what is a gameful experience. I know branding and well, not branding, like saying exactly what something is very important. But I do feel that sometimes when we get into these discussions, which I have to say I do actively participate as well, what is gamification, what it is not, when it's a game, when it's a gameful experience, when it's a playful experience. But I do feel that sometimes we kind of forget that there's most of the people who are out there and who are still to discover all these techniques, all these things, they don't really understand what we're talking about when we get into those discussions. So it's something that I do like to get into as an internal exercise, probably as an intellectual exercise. But there's many people out there that we can reach out to, so that they create amazing things and make education, from K-12 to higher education, they can make amazing things. And whether they discriminate, which is which, not necessarily always is going to be, at least not the first step for most people. So that's my 2 cents again. Gustavo, what would you say is your superpower, your sweet spot when designing a gameful experience or a gamification project?
So what I think that I'm good at is because I understand both the research side of gamification and the application side. I've been working on both industry and university even before I started working with gamification. And when I started a few years ago with gamification, I took the same route. I do research, but at the same time, I do consulting. I see the practical side. So I like to think that this is very helpful. Of course, I'm not the only one that have this power. It's not exclusive, but I think it helps me very much to understand both sides, so I can do research, but at the same time considering how things work in practice. And at the same time, when I'm actually designing something for a client, I can bring in the research and bring something that we can be more confident that's going to work because it has been researched before.
Yeah, that's extremely important and extremely useful because, again, research is what moves knowledge forward, and that's very, very important. So, Gustavo, now we're going to move into this slightly gamified question that we make to most of our guests. And the idea is that I'll bring something up randomly. However, it's been previously reviewed by me to make sure it makes sense for these kinds of questions. And the idea is that you will tell us how would you use gamification or gameful design or playful experiences to solve this problem or to answer this question. So the question is, okay, this one's interesting. This person is asking, he says, I have heard many times in this podcast of the importance of understanding your players before you dive into design mode. Can you explain how you do that? I'm having trouble getting started because of this step. So it's something that we were talking about before, the importance of understanding your players. But I guess this person wants to get a bit more granular, if you will, if you may, about how do you actually get into that user research? How do you do that, Gustavo?
Mm-hmm. Yes, okay. Great question. And yeah, exactly on topic about what we were saying before. So, well, you need to actually talk to people. Let's summarize it this way. It can be, let's say, you might use two different strategies. Maybe you might put on a survey, for example, asking people what are their goals, what are their interests, what they enjoy in the current process that they have, for example, what they don't like, what they would like to be different. So you could distribute this survey to a bunch of people, collect this information and try to summarize it. Or you could also do some sort of interviews with similar questions, but it depends on who your target population is. If you're building things for a specific company, for example, a specific group of people, it's easier to find, just to invite a few of those users to talk to. If you are creating a product that, for example, is going to be publicly available in the App Store or something like that, then you don't have specific users, right? But what you need to do is do a bit of market research and try to find out who would be your potential users, and then try to find people with those characteristics to invite your survey or to invite your interview. And really, it's a matter then of trying to understand what does people like and dislike, what are their needs, what are their goals, how do they feel about it, and maybe you could ask about specific motivational elements that you're thinking about and ask them if they think that would work, if not, why. And then again, in the end, you're going to summarize all the information, right? You can also mix it to approaches, of course. Surveys have the advantage that you can reach a larger population, right? But then users will probably only offer short answers. And if you are interviewing people on their hand, you're going to be able to talk with less people, but you're going to be able to actually talk to them, ask for clarification, ask for more details, so you get richer information, although from less.
You can go deeper in that
people.
Sense.
Exactly.
For sure. Thank you for that, Gustavo. That's a very interesting approach, and I love it because it's very practical. It's very straightforward to the point, and I hope that whomever asked that question is satisfied with that question, because I definitely am. So, Gustavo, we're almost done with this interview today, but before we say game over, I would like to ask you if you have any final quick piece of advice for the engagers, especially for those who are getting started. Maybe they haven't applied gamification or haven't applied it very, very little. What would you tell them? What would you say could be a first step, or any advice that you could give them if they're getting started?
Right. So first of all, I would say that gamification is fairly new. We still don't have any process that we could say for sure, well, just apply this simple set of steps and it's surely going to work. So if you want to do gamification, you really need to study and to understand what's behind it, not only follow a simple set of steps. That's probably not going to be enough. There is a lot of quality material already out there, books, blog posts, podcasts, everything that you can study that's really going to make a difference. and second advice, especially for engaging learners, is related to what I was talking about before in my experiences. I would suggest think about how to engage the students with learning, right? How to motivate them to actually see your experience as a learning experience and not just something that they need to complete to get a grade and be done with it. To focus your gameful experience in that, not just in making students comply to your rules and things like that, but how to motivate and engage them with actually learning more.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Gustavo. It's time now for you to give us how can we connect with you? How can people maybe ask you further questions, whether that's social media or your webpage, so that the engagers can ask you any further questions, and then we'll say game over.
Yes, perfect. So you can find me on Twitter if you prefer this platform, at Gustavo Tondello. Pretty straightforward. You can also find me on LinkedIn if you look for me. And I currently have 2 websites you can look for me. So blog.gamefulbits.com is my personal blog where I write about gamification. And MotiviUX.com is my consulting company. So you can contact me using each one of these websites. And if you prefer the good old email, then you can also reach me at gustavo@motivux.com, and I'll be glad to answer and to help with any need that you have related to gamification or user experience or anything like that.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Gustavo. That's Gustavo Tondello with 2 L's towards the end. So you can find him again on Twitter, on LinkedIn. All of these things you will be able to find as well. If you go to professorgame.com and type Gustavo, you will surely bump into Gustavo's episode, and you will find all of the information in the show notes. So thank you very much for your time, for your all the things that you gave very generously to the engagers. And now it's time to say it's game over. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey, engagers, thank you very much for listening to Professor Game Podcast. If you want more details of this interview with Gustavo, please go to professorgame.com/podcast/035. There you can also subscribe, and that way we can be in contact, and you will be having exclusive access to opportunities that Professor Game might have for you. And before you go on to your next mission, would you like to know what is an instructional coach and how it can help you on your gamification journey? Then you have to listen to John Meehan in the next episode of Professor Game. See you there!